Ciao friends, and welcome to a new Unplugged video from SQL BI. In this video, I want to answer a couple of questions that appeared on one of the forums of the articles that we previously published. The article is about how to select, how to make a single selection with a slicer and have a visual, like a chart, that shows the last 6 months prior to the selection that you made with the slicer. And there are a couple of interesting questions. The one is how to compute a running total instead of just the sales. And the other one is how to compute the sales of only the last day of the 6 previous months. Last day with sales. So let's take first a look at the question, then we do a very quick recap of the content of the article because we need to get acquainted with the data model and the DAX code, and then, as we always do with the Unplugged, we start reasoning on top of the question, and then hopefully we finally solve them. Let's get started. Now here is the article. Let me go at the beginning. The article is about how to show the previous 6 months of data from a single slicer selection. And the idea is that you have a slicer here. With the slicer, you select July 2007, but then in the chart, you see the sales of the last previous 6 months. I already have downloaded the file, so we can take a look at that with Power BI. You see that if I make a selection for July, I see July 2007, June, May, April. So the selection happens with a single date here with the slicer, but here I show 6 months. And if I go on December, of course, I have the 6 months before December. Now, we have a couple of questions here. It's already sorted by newest. Let's look at them. The first one is Carl Perkins that says, is there a way to use this method to return a running total for the previous period? So instead of seeing like here, the sales of each individual month, he wants to compute a running total. So on December, I need to show the data starting from July and going to December. I guess this is a running total. So we start from a value and we make it increase. And then there is also another question that is worth looking at that says, I have the same request, how to display the last 3 months. Oops. Okay, let's start again. The last 3 months end date for which there are sales. So if you select one day like the 20th of November 2021, you want to see the 30th of October, the 29th of September, and the 30th of August. This 29 is interesting because we want to show the last date with sales, not the last day of the month. But we will play a bit with the code, trying to find a solution. So let's start. Actually, it's good. Let me see, where do we start? Let's start with the running total. And let me recap briefly how this code works. So the final goal is to be able to build this visual that shows the last 6 months. Now, because the selection happens here on the date table, in order to show 6 months before before December 2007, we need another table, and that's what we did here. We have sales, we have date, and then we created another table, previous date. Previous date is used as the axis here. Let me overhit, select this, then go to calendar year month, and you see that on the axis of the chart, we don't have the previous date calendar year month. So the selection happens with the slicer. We use the information from the slicer in order to make a selection of 6 months out of the previous date, and then previous date is used here. The entire solution is built with a calculation group that we called previous period. And previous period is selected here to be the previous 6 months. You see that we have the selection in the filter of this visual only. Let me take a quick look at the code. it's a calculation group, so we need to use Tabular Editor in order to look at the code. Let's wait for Tabular Editor to open. Here it is. Okay. Previous period is a calculation group that has one calculation item, previous 6 months, and previous 6 months has a variable to indicate that we are interested in previous 6 months. It takes the last date selected with a slicer. Then, let's format the code. It takes, this way. It takes the previous 6 months in previous dates, and it takes the previous 6 months in the previous date table. And then it computes the selected measure, getting rid of any filter from the date, and using previous dates as a filter, activating the relationship between date and date. So if we look at the data model again, you see that previous data has a relationship, but this relationship is kept inactive. We activate this relationship, we place a filter here on previous date, and as a consequence, date will filter only the previous 6 months. But because we use keep filters, where is my tabular editor? Because we use keep filter, the visual actually already has a selection on an individual month, and this results in a single month being selected. That goes to the end result of having here the sales of a month. Now, what we want to obtain is something different. We want to compute a running total. So the idea is the same, but what we need to do is, instead of keeping the filter on the month, so keeping this filter for October and creating a filter that filters 6 months and then intersecting them, what we want to do in October is generate a filter that filters all the dates starting from July and going to October. So the algorithm will be something like take the end of October as a date, and then take the previous 6 months, from the beginning. We first select the first 6 months from December to July. Then when we are in October, we take the last day of October and we reduce the selection to be only from July to October. So it's actually the first 6 months, but we need to filter, to make a filter so that it replaces, so that, yes, it goes from July to October. But we also need to take into account the fact that we do have a filter here. So if I just replace the filter, that will show the value everywhere. So we will need to blank those values in some way. Anyway, that's an unplugged, so we need to create the code from scratch. Let me copy previous 6 months. So we copy this, we paste it, we copy, we paste it. Now I have previous 6 month 1 that we call running total 6 months. Now, previous dates retrieves the previous 6 months. The reference date is the maximum date. Out of these previous dates, we want to retrieve actually the entire set that happens to be before the max date. But max date is in previous date. So that is the reference date in date. Let me create another variable, reference previous date, which is the maximum of previous date. Now, max of previous date will be the end of August, the end of September, the end of October. And in previous dates, we are actually interested in all the dates in the previous 6 months. But we can add a filter here. Making sure that date, previous date is less or equal than the reference previous date. At this point, in previous dates, I will have not the previous 6 months from the last date, but the previous 6 months starting from the reference previous date. And I'm also using reference date, so the two are working together. But if I still keep it as it is, I don't think anything is gonna change because I need to get rid of this keep filter. I want to get rid of the filter. But let me save this. Let's refresh. Now, what I think is that if I now use here, not the previous 6 months, but the running total 6 months, the numbers are the same. Now, it's not easy to see the result just by looking at the chart. So let me make a copy of this. And we transform this into a matrix. No. Become a matrix, my friend. And we also need to change the font to something larger, like 20 points. Oh my god, I need to change the values of the column headers to 20 points. And somewhere I should also have the row headers. Row headers to 20 points. Much better. So if I use a running total, I see 922. And if I use a previous 6 months, I see 922. Nothing is changing. Because the filter on July is still active and the filter of August is still active. I need to get rid of this filter. But I still do not want to show the value everywhere. So, if I remove these keep filters and I just use previous dates, that actually should be enough because now previous dates overrides the filter. I don't know. Let me see what happens. I see July. Yeah, I start to see data from July because that's December. If I select January 2008, I see August. That is fine. But I also show data later. Now, the reason is, and let me see, the value for July is a number and then that number grows. So the running total is working. It's computing the correct value, but you see it shows data also in the future, which is kind of unwanted. Because when I'm here in September, what happens is that I filter out of the 6 months before December, I filter all the periods that are before the maximum previous, the reference date. No, the reference in the previous date. And that computes the running total. But when I'm here in, let's say, March 2008, that is after December 2007, March 2008 is stored here in the reference date. The reference previous date is March 2008. No, the reference date is December. The reference previous date is March 2008. And I'm filtering out of the 6 months before December, the dates that are before the reference previous date. So that is not working. But actually, what I can do is get rid of, just not compute the reference previous date as the maximum previous date, but stop at the reference date. So I can take the minimum of the maximum previous date or reference date. So if it happens that reference date happens to be before the last date, that reference previous date will go no later than December 2007. Let me save this. Did it save it? It did, but that didn't work, because I really need to blank out the value. The value is actually computed. So, despite looking smart, this didn't work. Now, what is the smartest way of doing that? Well, actually, what I can do is just blank out the value. So, if the reference previous date is less or equal than the reference date, that is not going to work either. Let me try. That checks if the value is before than the reference date, then show something, otherwise blank it out. No, actually it is working already. So if the reference previous date, that is October, is less than December 2007, then it shows the value. And that shows 92218, so it's showing a running total of the margin for whatever reason. And that should work also here. You see that now this shows a running total with when I select, instead of previous period, I select here running total 6 months. And doesn't look too bad. So I can already use this as an answer to the code. Now let's go for the next one. Let me recap the next one. The next one is that this guy wants to show the last 3 months end dates. Not only the last 3 months, but the last 3 months end dates. That requires making code which is a bit more intricate. Now, there are a couple of ways of solving the problem. The first one is to reduce the content of previous date to only the end of month. If I get rid of in previous date of all the dates except at the end of the month, then the filter on previous date will always filter the end of the month in the previous date, and that is already going to work. Of course, doing that will mess up the other calculation, but I think it's worth looking at it very, very quickly. So when I select December 2007, I want to see the end of December, the end of November, the end of October, only the end of the day. And we are going to do another calculation item. Let's copy previous 6. No, actually I can use previous 6 months with the filter. So let me go back here on previous 6 months. That is showing a value. If I reduce the content of previous date to only the end of the period, that is going to work. So instead of creating previous date as date, I just filter date, where date is the end of the month of date. So I retrieve only the dates that happen to be the end of the month. And it doesn't work. Too few arguments were passed to the end of month. The number of months to go ahead. I don't want to go ahead of any month, so I just pass 0. Now, by doing that, if I made it correctly, now previous data, let's sort it ascending. Previous date contains only the end of each month. And when the filter on previous date happens, what you see here is only the data at the end of the month. That doesn't actually solve the problem, because the question was not how to show only the last end of month dates, but the last end of month for which there are sales. So if it happens that in a month I do not have sales at the end of the month, my code is not going to work. Therefore, I need to make it a bit more complex. Let's go back here and restore the right scenario. Okay. First of all, we need to find a good test case. So I need to find a month for which we do not have sales at the end of the month. And I don't know where this month is. So let me search it with DAX Studio. We basically write a query where we search for a month where sales are not at the end of the month. So we start by summarizing sales by date, year, month. Do we have a year, month? Date, calendar, year, month. So now we have January, February, March, and so on. Let's take the calendar year, month number. 2007-01. Then we add a couple of columns. One is, let's call it end of month, which is calculate max of date. That is the end of the month, and then the end of sales. End of sales, where I retrieve the max, not of date, but of sales order date. So this is the end of the month, this is the end of date where we do have sales, and I'm interested only in the rows where end of month is not the same as end of sales. Okay, so we have a couple of examples. November 2007 and August 2008. We have sales on the 31 of August. Sorry, the end of August is the 31, but the end of sales is on the 30. So that is a good example. If I select September 2008, I should have my use case. So I need to go to September. Let's go for October 2008. I'm seeing data for August, but I don't want to see the data of August. I want to see the data at the end of August. So I need to change my calculation group. So let's create another calculation group that will restrict the sales only to the last day of the month. Let's start from previous 6 months. I copy it, I paste it, and that becomes previous 6 end of month. So what should I do? Well, let's first do a check. If out of dates in period, out of previous date, I only select the end of the month, I would expect my report to hide September to hide August, because we know that in August we do not have sales at the end of the month. So if I apply a filter here, using the same technique we used previously, so I want previous date to be the end of month of previous date, 0. So that previous dates becomes previous end of month. Let's call it previous end of month. If I now apply this calculation item, and I'm doing it right, I should have August disappear. We save it. We need to refresh this. And then on this visual, we select the previous 6 end of month. And that is good. You see that August now disappeared because in my filter here, I'm selecting the last, only the end of the month. But it is not actually what I want to do. I want to retrieve the last date from the sales table. So the previous end of month, that needs to be a filter that needs to be completely different. So I have the reference date that is maximum date. Let's create previous end of month. And I follow the same pattern I did earlier. I summarize sales by date, calendar year, month, number. And then I add the column to this. That is the last date with sales. So I create a new column, end of month, last date with sales, which is calculate max of sales order date. Now, at this point in this table, I have by year, month, number, the last date with sales. I'm not and I have actually the calendar year, month, number, and the last date with sales. I only want the last date with sales. So we add select columns. And we want a last date with sales. So last using this last date with sales, which is last date with sales. Actually, this calculation need to happen for the last previous month. So let me get rid of this part. And these dates in period need to be inside the calculate. Calculate all these in dates in period. So let me check. I'm retrieving the date. These dates in period need to be now on date. So I take the reference date, that is the last date. I start from the last date. I go back 6 months. And for 6 months, I retrieve the last date with sales. And that generates a table, previous end of month. That tabular editor says is a scalar because I'm using calculate. That should be calculate table. That is much better. Now it's a table with one column that is last date, the last date with sales. Now I have in previous end of month the last date with sales that has no lineage because I didn't use computing it with max sales. So I need a tree task. We can do that in a different variable. Previous end of month with lineage, and I use tree task to place a filter. We can place the filter, well, let's place a filter on previous date. So we treat as previous end of month as previous date. So now is a datetime, a column datetime with the last date with the lineage of previous date. And then I think it's enough to use this variable here. We remove a filter from date, we keep the filter, we keep filters because we want to use the current month, and we activate the relationship. I mismatch the variable, that is previous end of month with lineage, I would say that this should work. Totally not sure about that. Let me save it. Go back here, the previous 6 end of month. I have no idea whether it's working. We can look at the individual numbers. If I select the previous 6 months, that shows for August 952. If I take the previous 6 end of month, for it shows August 18,000. That is likely to be the sales of the last date for August. We can actually add the date just to check that we have a good number. You see, for August, oh, it's showing all the dates in August. Why that? I don't need to use date. I need to use previous date. Much better. For August, it shows the 31 of August. Oh, because I needed to choose here December 2008. For August, it shows the 30 of August. For September, the 30 of September. For October, the 31 of October. And in August, it shows 23,000, which is much less than the original value. Sorry, the original value that would be there if I use the previous 6 months. Actually, I can get rid of the margin and take the previous period, place it on the columns, and then get rid of this filter. So previous 6 end of month show a value only for the 31, which is the same value here. That is correct. But if I remove the date, I have the previous 6 end of month, the previous 6 months, and the running total out of 6 months. So that looks like we solved it. It's now time to go back to the forum, answer the question, provide the code, and then time to edit the Unplugged. I hope you liked this video. As it always happens with Unplugged videos, we do not exactly know what's going to happen. In this case, we had 2 quite simple questions. Both were related to how to change the filter context, and we were lucky because the code in the calculation group was nicely written, so changing the filter context was not that hard. Remember, working with DAX is always a matter of understanding how to move the filter context the right way. You start from a filter and then you play with the filter context going back and forth until you find a suitable filter that computes the right value. DAX is not magic. DAX is only about understanding the row context, the filter context, context transition, and then learning how to use the tools and your brain in order to solve problems. I hope you liked the video and enjoy DAX.